All right, folks, welcome back to kind of a special episode of Peach Pit. I mean, we've had a lot of firsts this season, and we've now had the ultimate first this season. But before we get into our usual business, I want to address last week we actually did record a show, or we recorded a show. We all showed up, and it was a really fun show. We did a Dalton review, and we previewed Columbus. We spent some time with Chris Wilson from 1771. Unfortunately, we had some technical difficulties, and we weren't able to put that show out. Notably, we just forgot to record it. So I think this show is hopefully being recorded. Yes, Anupam? Is it being recorded?
Yes, it is being recorded.
Okay.
100%.
I can guarantee it. It's being recorded this time. That was my bad last time.
Yeah.
It's
So this show should be as smooth as it can be given our current circumstance, but we'll talk about that in just a minute. Now, before we get started, we have to make the usual disclaimer. Any views or opinions shared on the show are solely that of the individual contributor and do not reflect the views of Peach Pit, any FRC team, First, Georgia First, or any of their affiliates and sponsors. Anupam, can you give the show an introduction?
Yeah. So, for those of you who haven't seen us, or for those of you who have, the idea behind this show is to serve as an FRC talk show that focuses primarily on the Peachtree District. We're going to be talking about a variety of topics, so don't be surprised if you see us drop some hot takes. Ultimately, we're hoping to provide some entertaining and engaging discussions for our community. And with that, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Anupam Goli. I am the head coach of FRC Team Auto, 1746.
I'm Kellen Hill, mentor for 1746 Auto.
My name is Kyle Fender. I'm the lead strategy coach for FRC Team 1002 and also one of the MCs for Georgia First.
And my name is Sunny. I'm a former FRC mentor and a current FRC enthusiast. Now, to get things started, we're going to directly address sort of the elephant in the country at the moment and talk about, the corona pandemic and then the season impact that it's had, right? Notably, last Wednesday, I believe it was, late Wednesday, Georgia First started by straight up postponing the season, which we had seen a few other districts do, but at that time the cases in Georgia were sort of ramping up. And so Georgia First took the step of just postponing the season. Shortly after, about 24 hours later, First suspended the whole season for everybody, and they canceled two champs, right? That kind of makes sense because the logistics of championship, just getting those venues in order, is very difficult. So postponing them was probably not an option. So what do you guys think about that? What's happening with the season? Do you think it was okay? Should they have continued? What are your thoughts?
I think that it made sense, honestly, because if we think about it, when it comes to First, it's a big thing about allowing the students to be able to compete, but the reality is so much larger than just the students. As much as the students are an integral part of the experience itself, you have, the sponsors that are supposed to be coming in to take a look at the robots. You have all of these industry professionals as guests and everything else. And with all that stuff, if you're trying to do a teams-only type of event where you're having to go bare minimum, the logistics of it and just the look of it in general just wouldn't work towards what First wants as the overall image of their competition. So, I mean, going other than the obvious part of common sense of we're dealing with a pandemic, we don't want to create any situations where we're putting people in danger, especially those that are at high risk. So yeah. I think it was their best decision.
It's actually kind of...
it's weird we're not quite a week removed from the decision yet, but it seems like it was a long time ago. But it does. We were a bit torn up at the time because we were stringing along hope that maybe we'll make it through the rest of the season. Maybe we'll get one more event. Maybe. We went as far as trying to sign up for the Columbus district the night before just to try to get that one more play in, but in hindsight, I think it was the right decision all the way to shut things down. And I think it's the right move, the safe move.
Yeah,
Um,
it's actually kind of interesting you mentioned Kyle, because at first Georgia first really tried to keep things going, right?
Yeah.
So like they tried to do teams only, they tried to do like necessary team members only. So I think they really gave it an effort, but I kind of wonder if they were even like somewhat overruled by like other people, like, hey, not a good idea. You should tone it back, postpone events, just do this properly. So, something interesting to consider, like how that really happened.
Well, from what I gleaned at Columbus, they were thinking of keeping the event going, but a bunch of teams had already dropped out. So the night of, it got down to 26. And then they were waiting on Albany because Albany supposedly had a case of COVID-19, and they were waiting on a decision. If Albany schools were to pull out, they would be left to just 23 teams, even if we had signed up for Columbus as well. So I think that's kind of what I'm hearing is what really pulled the plug on Columbus, and then they just went ahead and, based on the situation, decided to call everything else.
yeah, I think there was so between that information and the critical mass within First as a whole, just for the amount of districts that were dropping out between that Wednesday night and Thursday, I think it was just time to pull the plug on the season or
Yeah.
postpone the season, I guess, as it's been worded.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting that the season is like quote unquote suspended, right? Which ultimately leaves room for things to kind of kick back online, right? Um, with the way things are looking, I don't think it'll be any time like I think we're talking months, not weeks.
Yeah.
But I think we will get somewhat of a culmination to the season. I'm kind of excited about that. But let's kind of move on and not really move on, but let's talk about the season resuming, right? And what that might look like. So when we think about some of the things that might happen, the Pacific Northwest was actually one of the first districts. I think it was the first district to postpone. And from the information we were seeing there, it seemed like they might go and do something in the fall, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I think Chesapeake, like they just rescheduled their district championships to over the summer. So, I think the question here is really, how do you guys see the season resuming? How do you want it to resume? And what do you think it'll look like?
I just want more opportunities to play, really. After spending so much time, energy, money, pouring our effort into this, building this robot, obviously we're in some sense fortunate to play once, but I'd really like to see the robot get back on the field, play some more with our friends from the PCH district. Be awesome to play with teams that we had any familiarity with at Worlds, but we might miss out on that for the foreseeable future. But yeah, just to get some more opportunities to play with our robot.
I would.
No,
go ahead.
You go.
Okay, so I would imagine that Georgia First is thinking of at least hosting some district events in the fall, maybe as like small little off seasons. I'm not sure if they'll be able to schedule in a district championship in the fall with everything going on, and if the 2021 season resumes or starts in January, they may want to give people a bit of a break. But I wouldn't be surprised if they at least tried to hold a couple of events as off seasons, and then they did just a point-based score at the end to do crown the district champion.
So like not even like a larger district championship event. You're saying just like smaller events here and there, and then just point based.
Yeah, because think of the logistics with each district event. They would have to get the venue for that time, and on a short notice too, and something that's like not routine for that venue.
So I would actually counter with that. And here the reason why is because of when it happened. So, let's assume that this lasts a couple months. It's March now. We may have opportunities if we see that the curve is flattened with COVID-19. towards June, right? I think you're going to see a lot of more opportunities for venues coming up between June and then October. Because let's be real, a lot of the events that are usually happening in those arenas that really cause us to really have to squeeze in all that opportunity is during the winter spring, where you have basketball, you have indoor track and field, you have all these different events that require indoor venues. When it comes to later on in the summer/fall, you're having a lot more football type events, or football events, outdoor events. So I think that in terms of being able to basically finish out the season, I think we'll be able to find the venues to be able to host them in, and I think we may even have more opportunities for maybe bigger/better venues. I mean, I think it's great that we have a consistent venue in Albany. We have a consistent venue in Columbus. But let's be real, Mercer's a great place to have it in Macon. But if there is an opportunity to be able to host it back up here in the Metro Atlanta area, I don't think that it'd be out of the question for Georgia First to say, hey, let's grab this opportunity to maybe replace the Grits event and then to just have straight up a state championship or district state championship. So,
well, I don't necessarily think that a venue will be that difficult to nail down. So like Grits last year was hosted at like Kells High School or something like that.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't see a reason why you couldn't have a district event like Carrollton, right? Carrollton, like replacement, you don't have to have it at the Carrollton venue. You could say, hey, we're going to host it at Kells High School. Just, something very light, something you don't have to put a lot of like planning, a modern amount of planning, but you don't have to arrange like a full venue. It's just coordinating with the school, right?
And that's where it'll be interesting to see if it'll be a continuation of, so counting the 2 districts that were played to then have a few extra events and any eventual district championship. But I think the other trick is getting teams to have the same amount of participation that they would in the regular season, have them participate at that same level for off-season, summer or fall events. What percentage of teams are actually going to turn out, considering it's not the regular season, what teachers are busy during the summer, which have different schedules during the fall that won't allow participation. So I'd be interested in if it winds up being a couple of smaller scaled back events that might result in a more, again, somewhat scaled back district championship. I don't know if you're going to have the same amount of team participation, but I'd love to see as many teams as we can.
Yeah. I kind of wonder, because like we are sort of thinking from like a district perspective, right? Like there's going to be a qualifier, there's going to be a championship. I kind of wonder if maybe they fall back to sort of like a pseudo regional thing. So they host one large event up here in the Atlanta area, one large event down south for like more of the southern teams, and you'll have a little bit of crossover. But do we really need to have qualifiers and then a big district championship where we can just say we host 2 large regionals and sort of call that a season, right?
This would also be an awesome opportunity to play out like a situation where it's like a super regional almost. So we pull in surrounding states to say, hey, let's do a combined region and make this and you can then host a region championship instead of just a PCH championship.
So
I think there could be some fun opportunities there.
I guess, yeah.
Not Peachtree. So,
hey man,
some skewed idea. Instead of having 2 world championships, you just have a single smaller one with then. Instead of regionals, you'd have super regionals. So you'd have a cluster of like the southeastern states would have a region championship instead of the amount of regionals you'd have. But you'd then have teams qualify via smaller events for that region championship to then qualify for a world championship. In this case, the world championship wouldn't happen. But you could at least play out the structure of being a super regional system. But that would also allow smaller states that can't really justify hosting a number of events to get them more involved easily.
So realistically, and I've thought about this for the past week. It wasn't anger from different people. It wasn't protest. It was a pandemic that killed two champs. After years of thinking about it, a pandemic took it out, and I can't be happy about it because it takes away a great ending to a season from many people, but also your idea of basically combining it to super regional. It kind of almost gives us the plan to kind of try that out, because I think that is where we could go to eventually, and I think that would honestly work a lot better than the Choose Champs system that we have now. So I think this is especially, since in essence we're going to be playing off seasons at this point, I think this is a great time to basically just test out, especially with a game that it's not fatigued on us. It's not we're not fatigued by the game, where we can realistically figure out the best way to go about first in this kind of whole new world type of thing going to 2021.
And that's where First invited more, or made two champs to invite more teams to have the World Championship experience. But in this system, you could have that level of inspiration take place at super regionals.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Because I'm sure that amount of, depending on how you cluster the states, you could put on a pretty good show without having the World Championship level.
So what you're saying, Kellen, is like you want like 4 champs or like 6 champs? Is that
No, one champ with like 6 to 10 regional championships.
Yeah, but like the logistics of that are, I just feel like time-wise, right? You would probably need at least 3 to 4 weeks of like buffer for like those 2 events to happen, right?
Also,
I don't think it's the same structure. Instead of district season, you still have district season. Instead of district championships, you have super regionals.
Mm-hmm.
And then in world champs is just world champs. You just kind of reshape the tiers a little bit.
So
it's
you don't
basically
think
what
that,
they did with FTC.
So you don't think that you would need a buffer between your last qualifier event and the super regional? Like
no different than you'd need. You might have to travel a little further depending what state you're in, just for getting hotels booked and such.
I mean, I think about the Southeast as like one sort of region, right? Mm-hmm. If you're in Florida right now, you have to come up to Atlanta from your qualifier to your super regional. That's
a flight.
That's a big trip.
But that's probably that for most teams that would be your big trip of the season. That's depending on how many teams you'd then, or the qualification structure you'd have to then the World Championship event. That super regional is the big show.
Yeah.
Just invite like all the Einstein winners to World Championships after that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you'd say like the top 20 ranked teams from each, or top 10 ranked teams or something like that from each regional champion or super regional get to qualify for then Worlds, or have some thought would have to be put into the qualification structure. But
I mean, the reality about all of this is that we've already done it. Like, they basically test drove it with FTC. The only thing you do is take out the state championship, and then quite literally it's like you have your qualifier events, you go to a super regional, and then from there you go to the world championships. Done and simple. But I mean, especially being the state that kind of hosted a lot more of the super regional events as we did them for FTC, they went all out to make sure that those FTC super regionals were the best produced in the nation that they could get. So they went all out for the production, for the lighting, for everything. And it was because they wanted it to feel like these guys were about to step onto the world stage and to show who these guys were. So they wanted them to have the big show rather than, let's be honest, when you go to Peachtree State Championship last year, like, obviously great event, great production, but when I talk to some of the teams, a lot of times it's like, I didn't feel that moment, that same type of moment where it's like, if the parallels, if you're playing basketball and you're in the state championship, the lights are dimmed, you're walking, like running through the tunnel as they're announcing your name. They didn't have that same type of atmosphere or environment that they could relate to. And so I feel like doing something like a super regional system, and then we go all out for it, and all these different states would pool the money towards making this a supreme event. I feel like that would be, a great way to display what FIRST is, especially not just for students, but also to potential sponsors and other people that are looking to join FIRST in some sort of capacity.
Yeah. So I'm going to move us along. So let's just briefly covering, how the season might resume, whether we're going to have qualifiers, 1 event, 5 events, super regionals, whatever. But between now and then, right, well, what are teams going to do, right? So let's focus to start out with on the short term, right? The short terms maybe next 1 to 2 months. What should teams be looking to do right now, right? And I'm going to kick this off by saying that I agree with some of this sentiment out there that just don't get too worked up, because I think a lot of teams see this as an opportunity that, hey, we're going to go scrimmage and we're going to rebuild our robot and we're going to get back in the shop as soon as we can. I just don't think right now is the time for that. Even if you're not very heavily impacted, just relax, stay home. We'll get a chance to play more robots later, but for now, just take it easy, right?
Yeah.
That, and it's a good time to take a break after how strenuous the regular build season and competition season is. It's nice to take a breather at this point. Definitely. Instead of having to wait until the potentially middle or end of April to get a breather after the normal regular season's over. But
so yeah. Up here in Forsyth County, we've been pushed to online learning, and a lot of metro area counties have been also pushed to online learning. So the way we're doing it here is that you have a normal school day and you have normal working school hours. So I think if your team meets after school or something, it might be a good idea to maybe host a team meeting on Slack or an online service once every while, once or twice a week. Just take a breather, figure out how your season went, and then maybe do some online brainstorming, or maybe there's Onshape. It's an online CAD program. Then you can learn Java programming online. There's things to do without being in the shop in the robot.
Yeah, I think one of the things that teams very rarely have this opportunity is to capture some of the momentum from the season, right? You have all this time, and typically people are pretty engaged in the spring. Now, we're not saying that you go out and you start building and you start meeting, but you can use some of this momentum to start directing some sort of trainings, right? So if you're trying to learn CAD, right, get online, get into a Discord call that we're doing right now, or get into a Slack and start learning CAD, right? If you've been trying to look at wondering how Swerve works, right, now's a great time to start doing that research, seeing what modules are out there and things like that, right?
That's where I think this argument kind of sticks. There is a comparable argument to any given year on how you, once your season's over, how do you go about using your time? In this case, the season has just ended prematurely. We still have the same problem set of, all right, we're still building robots, we're still training members to be more have a higher contribution on the team. We're always looking to prepare for next year. But in this case, we just get to do that a little earlier. So if you're looking at a normal season, this is kind of obviously you have a bunch of resources for time, money, personnel. Just keep developing those things. Obviously, our time budget's gone way up for the amount of time we have available. Access to robots and equipment's kind of gone, or is a little bit questionable at this phase of the game. But yeah, just see what resources you have available and start planning for what your team can be doing to prepare for the off season. If your team's going to try going to more off season events, or start those trainings as Sunny and Anupam mentioned. But
I mean, what we've been saying to our team is the off season started Thursday. Thursday after the announcement came out, the off season started then, and I think it, as we told the kids, especially because we just got off doing no bag season, so definitely, you had to figure out a lot of things in terms of pace. So now, the students are gaining time, at least now, like a month plus, to kind of deal with not just, everything happening with the coronavirus, but now they also can really honestly get caught up with schoolwork, do whatever they need to do. And then what we've kind of resolved with our kids is we're going to help in terms of making sure that our structure is tight. So we're going to look back, see what worked, what didn't work in our season, and then go from there. And building up our own learning management system through Google Classroom to go ahead and to kind of set in stone, like, okay, like this is how we're going to do things going into 2021, or even honestly just into the off-season competitions themselves. So, off-season starts now.
Yeah,
and that's one of my favorite discussions to have, either at the end of an event or at the end of a season, is the what went right, what went wrong, what are we going to do better next time? And this no time like the present to have that conversation.
Yep.
Yeah, and I find that at the end of the season, it's such like an awkward time because, school is kind of ramping down. Teams are typically doing like end of year parties, and at the same time, you're trying to plan for the off season. You're like trying to stay focused, but it never really happens. And then you roll into summer, and then everything just sort of falls apart, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, a lot of teams still have, like, we're in the middle of March, right? You still have about 2 solid months of time. Now, you can't meet in person, but you should be doing some of the debriefings, some of the trainings, putting this time to use, honestly.
Mhm.
But those are some of the short-term, like, tactics and things like that. But when the season gets started again, right, we're going to have a lot of warning, first off, because as things cool down, as people start getting back into school, I think that's when Georgia First can start arranging some of the venues and things down the line, right? So it's not like things are going to cool down and then we're instantly going to be back, right? So I think one of the questions is like longer term. So when the season maybe starts in the fall, September, October, what are some things that teams should be trying to maybe look at doing to their robots for that time?
Well, getting to Einstein's off the table.
We'll have our own Einstein.
Yeah, but in reality, one of our students had made a comment that struck me when we were going through our conversation of how we might want to go about using our time, is that I'd kind of laid it out of, teams are going to, for actually getting more competitions in, you're either going to want to just compete more because you either only competed once or 0 times, and that number 2, they're going to want to compete at a higher level. But his comment wound up being that we shouldn't be worried about being too overly competitive, or and this is one of our seniors that's not going to get to compete in a regular season event again, but made the comment of we need to be using our time or throwing our resources at making improvements to the robot, but making sure those are training opportunities for the future generation of our team, because they're going to be the ones contributing next season when we get to play on bigger stages again. We get to play on the world stage again. So already looking forward at how we might improve, not just, yes, the robot in some sense, but more so the team and our structure to be then more competitive come next year.
Yeah.
When I hear that, I like read between the lines and I hear swerve. I'm like, oh, that's like, oh my God, you're talking about swerve. We're not talking about swerve. I can see it. Okay.
I don't know what that will entail.
You don't know that. So I will actually open the can of worms on swerve, right? So for those that don't know and like why there might be a little bit more hype around this season 148 has a swerve drive, right? And it's very good, which most swerve drives that you've seen implemented by top teams are very good, right? But the reason that it's new is because like a couple years ago, 148's mentor wrote a blog post that's like, we're never going to do swerve. And then this year they do a swerve. And what to me has really changed in the landscape is that right now there is a swerve module that's available for sale that anybody can go and buy. And 148 is directly using that module, right? That they're not rebuilding it, re-engineering it. They're not doing anything. They're just like, you know what, this cooks. We're going to take it. We're going to put it on our robot. And that's that, right? So I think a lot of top teams, maybe 1746, I don't know.
I will make the comment that we've been known to copy almost as directly as possible 148 mechanisms over the past few years. But that being said, I think this is one of the best robot we've come up with right off the bat. That I think we're going to be focusing on more minimal changes to that robot instead of significant structural changes like a whole new drivetrain.
This is where I would almost push back, right? Because we're not talking about a change from week 3 to week 6, right? We're talking about a change from March to October, right?
Now, we do
theoretically, right?
We don't know when we're going to get back.
Well, like we said, a lot of that work can happen virtually, right?
I did make, I don't know if I mentioned on here before enough, but we did wind up having a mechanically complete swerve drive before the 2020 season started. It never got fully operational programmatically, but that could be something for an off-season project to get back to a functional state and do some testing. Yeah. Will it end up on a robot that we compete with for a 2020 off-season event? We'll see.
Right. So I think my point is just largely like, I hope that teams use this big chunk of time to maybe try some of those bigger updates. Like one thing we have noted here is, Kyle, did you want to say something? Sorry. Okay, no. Okay.
No.
It's hard, this virtual thing. I'm like trying to like, do you raise your hand? So one thing we have noted here is like 1261 and 7451. Should they upgrade their machines to have shooters, right? And if you asked me this during the regular season, like if like we were having this discussion right now and the season wasn't suspended or postponed, I'd say probably not, right? But I think they find themselves in this weird little no man's land where they're very good low-goal robots, but they're not good enough to be a first pick. So when they go into somewhere like District Championships, they're going to kind of be caught on that hump in the middle. So I'd say if they have sort of the wherewithal to proceed a little cautiously, see if they can push this larger change going into the off season, right?
Mm-hmm. We did that in 2016. That was exactly what happened. We played low goals all season. We added a climber during the season. But we managed to find our way into IRI. I think that was the first time we wound up going as a team. But finding our way into IRI, and we made the decision as a team that, hey, if we want any chance at making elims at IRI, we got to go high goals. So we wound up essentially having a brand new build season. We used the same drivetrain, but pretty much building on top of that, just made as straightforward as we could, just a high goal shooter that wound up being a pretty proficient shooter from the batter and wound up doing fairly well. Didn't make elims, but had a good time doing it.
Yeah, and sorry, go ahead.
So I was gonna say about 7451, right? They've already kind of solved the problem of indexing. That's like the main one of the main issues when trying to load a shooter up is how do you index balls. So with their low goal dumper, they've kind of already done that. So I could see them maybe go for trying to add a shooter on top of that robot. I don't see if it would be super difficult to use all of this time to redo the CAD and get that going.
Honestly, I'm not even sure if they need to redo any CAD. Just like take a shooter and like staple it onto the top of their conveyor. Like there you go, right? High goal shooter. But I think one thing that's something to consider is that I think a lot of the everybots benefited from having that design resource already out there, right? They could go to the website, they could see the CAD. There is a pre-CADed shooting robot resource, right? That's the competitive concept from West Coast Products.
Yeah.
So if a team like 1261 who relied on that everybot template, there is a shooting robot template out there, right? It may not be as well documented as the everybot, but it's there. They could explore it and they could use this time to upgrade their machine, right? So it's just something to consider as teams have all this time.
Mhm.
Yep.
Sure.
So one thing I want to ask, and it's not on the agenda, so it's a little bit of a surprise. You guys are on teams, right? I'm not on an active team, but so I'll say this, like short term and long term. If you could give us like a couple of brief sentences about where you guys are looking, what are you going to be doing? What are you going to be looking at for the off season, things like that.
Oh,
Kellen, Anupam, 1746 folks.
Yeah,
I-
I'll
Yeah,
try
you guys
to
go
fill
first.
in some comments here. Short term, I think it's about staying organized and on top of it. Like you kind of mentioned, is not letting that enthusiasm go for the season. Figure out how to harness that energy that we would have had for competing at Carrollton this upcoming weekend or state champs that we were so excited about. Is harnessing that and aiming it in the right direction. I think some people have a bit of a negative reaction to, oh, I don't get to play my final competitions. But if we can aim that energy in the best direction possible, for again either aiming at trainings or just staying organized, figuring out how we can improve. But long term, and it's kind of on the same topic, is just improving the system, getting the ball rolling on those off-season long-term goals of training new members, making some modifications to the robot, but with higher priority on training new members and having them design parts on those robots. We're graduating a couple of the most talented designers I've ever had the privilege of working with for students on our team. But we'll have some shoes to fill, but it's in some weird way, this is an awesome opportunity to be able to fill those shoes for next season.
Kyle, give us the circuit runner rundown.
Circuit runner rundown. Short term, I think it's honestly rest, recuperate, and to basically just come to terms with the season that we had. Like I said, that in our first episode or second to first, episode, that this year was a big year change for us personally as a team, where we took a lot of strides in terms of how we take on not just leadership, but just the entire build process. So really just taking time to reevaluate where we are. And honestly, it is the rest part, because, we realized as coaches and as mentors that you can definitely challenge a student, and it's good to challenge, but also, you have to realize when to pull back and to really allow a student to be able to breathe and to be able to be themselves. So this is definitely the best opportunity that we've had to be able to do that. Long term, a lot of it is honestly just going to be building on the momentum that we've had this year. We're implementing a whole new coaching system. So we're honestly going to be running a lot more like a lot of the other teams that I was able to be a part of, where it's more mentor run, student led. That way we can honestly help bring a sustainable image for circuit runners for years to come, as well as building up our learning management system, building up our workflow process that's going to basically mirror Agile, and honestly just be ready to come screaming out of the gates for 2021.
Hey, that plan sounds very, very familiar. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, good luck to you guys on that. Hopefully, whenever the season restarts, you guys will have achieved whatever you're looking to do, and Honestly, I just want to see a swerve. I want to see a good swerve. Is that too much?
I do remember hearing of a couple swerves this season with modules falling off. So if you're doing it, make sure it's nice and robust.
Yeah.
Yes.
A good swerve. Okay. All right. So with that, we're going to sort of turn our attention back towards the competitive aspect of the program and kind of talk about Dalton, right?
Mhm.
Now, Dalton was a couple of weeks ago, and we've already kind of had some of this discussion, but we're gonna do it again. So to get started, we're just gonna talk about the Dalton results, right? So the winners were Team 1771. Anybody?
North Gwinnett Robotics.
Yeah, 2974,
Walton Robotics.
3329.
Wild.
Blood bots.
Is it Wildbots? There you
Yeah.
Yeah, they were the big one. I was like, is anybody gonna get them? Finalists: Team 1102,
go. Making Magic.
4910,
East Cobb Robotics.
3581.
Think robotics.
Think,
Yeah, there you
think
go.
with a C, right?
Think
Yeah.
Yes.
Think robotics alliance. They're an
No.
alliance on an alliance.
Ha! Okay.
Bad joke.
All right. And the Chairman's Award was won by 2974 Walton, back on top. And the Engineering Inspiration Award was won by 7514 E Robotics,
Yeah.
which is our second year team. So they're definitely off to a great start in their program. Right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Very much so.
Before we talk about some of the robots that we saw, we have a little gift from a team, right? Who's got the Walton Thunderstick?
I've got it, but Kellen, if you want to show them how they gave it to us first.
I'll do a little lead in here. If you don't recall watching the PCH reveal night, we chewed on Walton's robot a little bit. Kyle and others more specifically. I don't know if I was involved.
Hey.
I may have been involved, but Walton apparently took this as an attack on the design of their intake.
Attack.
But I wound up volunteering at the Dalton event as an FTAA, so I was down field side. And during the event, I got approached by Walton saying, "Hey, we have this thing, we got to get it to you, but you have to open it live on air." Unfortunately, it was footage lost in the lost episode. But what we do have is I have a picture of the wrapped up package that I received, as sketchy as it was. So let me pull that up here for a quick second. But we wound up opening this up live on air, and it wound up being the intake that, again, we went after a little bit due to Walton's known capability of designing intakes. But I believe Anupam has it up on his screen to then show off as what the unwrapped intake actually wound up being.
All right,
Anupam
Anupam, let's
can
see
show
it.
them.
All right, so hold on, it's upside down.
Yeah.
All right, that's
Hold
weird.
on, like- Zoom it out a little bit so we can see like the size. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like nice. It's a
Paper
nice little.
mache.
Yeah, so if you don't remember, we called it the paper mache. We were thinking was
Yeah.
we were a little bit concerned about how it would hold up, but Walton then handed this off to us as a. I think they replaced it with something else and no longer have paper mache, but.
Well, it's got like
So-
duct tape or masking tape on it.
I will say, to their credit, right? Last week I was like wielding it with authority to, like, during our show. That is a pretty solid piece. So what it is like almost like a PVC plastic down the middle. It's very thick, and then the like corners of that are pool noodle, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I can imagine it has that like almost star profile that it would like run and it would grab at like specific points. It's interesting to see they moved away from it, but it's definitely a very welcome addition to our setup. Whenever we do get back in person, it's going to be by my side. So
It's gonna be a little whacking stick.
it's going to be
I'll
my
be
gavel.
I'll be sitting at the other table.
I mean,
I have a long arm and that's a long stick, so reach, right?
the quotes on there I mean, I'm gonna give them this. They lived past all those clothes. That intake that they had was very reliable. It worked very well for them to be able to win. So kudos to them. They proved us wrong.
Yeah, they got a streak going now. Last year was a good intake. This year, good intake.
There you go.
No trends can be counted on anymore. But Walton broke the trend of bad intakes. So.
Who would have thunk? But before we get into Walton and their intaking, I do have a little request for gifts almost, right? Definitely when things calm down and we return to our regularly scheduled events, we do sort of encourage teams to send things in, right? Well, firstly, we don't have a mailing address, so find one of the guys events, give it to them, right? And hope that they pass it on. Secondly, I would encourage creativity, right? So don't just send us your buttons. I don't want them, right? No. But if you guys have something unique, if you guys have something kind of fun you want to send up here, we'd love to have it. We'd love to show it off on the show. So I think it's a good way to get your team name out there. So I think Kellen really likes those. What are those things called, Kellen? Those big heads.
Yeah. I think Jefferson Martin has been featured on our show with his big head.
Yeah, so
a couple others out there. But.
Yeah, for some reason we're huge fans of those. If you're, if you have anything unique that's cultural to your team, send that up. Send up a little story. We'll be happy to share it on our show.
If you have hats with controversial messages, not too controversial, but
controversial, like a first way, not
exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. So send those along with the guys. Find them at events, and hopefully we'll have a lot more fun on the show. All right. So moving on to some of the teams at Dalton, I think we're just going to start with Walton because they were arguably one of the best teams there. So what do you guys think about Walton? What do you think about what they laid down?
What do I think about Walton?
Come on, Kyle. Give them the love.
No, I'm going to give them the love for this. I thought that they were very consistent. I thought they were very consistent at Dalton. I thought they were able to really do well in terms of their shooting ability, even though they didn't go towards using their turret, but they were able to really utilize all their parts in terms of creating a consistent experience every single match. The only thing I have against them is that their climber was floppy. That's it. Honestly, that was the only thing. Other than that, they played a very clean game. Coppin says it well, that they try to find something that they can be experts at, and then they hit it hard. So they went for it and went for that 3-point shot and were consistent at hitting it every single time.
Yeah.
And they created a intake to work with it. They created everything to work with that experience so that they could be consistent in their competitive experience.
Yeah, and I think that 3-point shot was kind of the thing that really stood them out because they weren't particularly fast. Their intake wasn't all that great. They didn't have really a spindexer, but I think one of the things that a lot of people noticed is that they did have a lot of accuracy with those 3-point goals, right?
Yes.
And I think that really allowed them to sort of hammer home those points. So one of the things I want to call out is their autonomous modes, right? I think Walton has been one of the leaders when it comes to the pathing autonomous modes in our district.
Yeah. Yes.
And at Dalton, they really showed it off, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was a big fan of that 2-ball routine that they did to steal the balls from the other team's safe zone, just because that's 2 balls you're denying the other opponent, and you're still scoring that from your sweet spot. And you can leave the trench run to your other ally. That's one of the more common autonomouses in our district so far. Multi-balls Yeah.
Well, one of the things I wonder for Walton is, apparently or allegedly they're working on getting a turret on their robot, right? I kind of wonder, if we were in a regular season and you had to choose, would you go for a turret or would you go for a faster shooter if you were Walton at that current point. Right?
Fast, go fast.
Yeah,
Fast.
faster shooter hit the trench run shot.
Especially like they were so consistent with their shot, but you did notice that their shots can lag. So I feel like if there's any point of the robot to really improve, it's honestly just going to be the speed of the shot. So.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. Just to play a little bit of devil's advocate, I do think that the turret will allow them to do some of the more aggressive autonomous modes.
Sure.
So before we went on break, I think one of the FRC teams had an autonomous mode where they were moving and shooting balls, right?
Yeah.
And that allowed them to shoot 11 total.
That's
right?
nuts.
That was insane.
Yeah, it is. So I think Walton could get to that point where they score, above, like, in that 10 range if they have a turret, right? Granted, combined that they do need speed, so
and that's where you start counting fractions of a second for those 15 seconds, which Walton did a fantastic job with the robot they have for the path planning that they had for just getting the robot lined up to then target with their camera, for having the autons they did have. But I'd be real interested in seeing what they could pull off if they had a turret on the thing, because that helps shave some of those fractions of a second off and get you some additional shots in that autonomous.
Yeah, for sure. So in the interest of time, we're going to move on from, and we're going to talk about 4910, right? East Cobb. Go ahead.
So East Cobb Robotics. Sorry, I interrupted you in that introduction, but I just wanted to say I was very impressed with how they came out in the first match with that turreted shooter doing the multi-ball auto and with that climb. I thought at that time that was the robot to beat when I saw that thing play in the district.
Yeah. But I think kind of similar to what we saw last season, like people caught up to them, right? And this season it happened much, much more quickly than I think even they anticipated.
Yeah, in the same event.
Yeah, at the same event. So, they have a lot going for them. I think they had the same opportunities that Walton has, right? Maybe a little inverse, that maybe East Cobb needs to sort of shore up on their autonomous modes. Getting a phone call.
Well, that's where I think 4910's developed a reputation as like one of the most well-oiled machines in PCH. Year after year, they seem to come out that, all right, we're going to participate at this known level. It's going to be a high level, and we're going to keep playing at that level. So in terms of either robots breaking down or not being able to contribute here or there, they seem to be one of the teams that just keeps playing at that high level and staying there.
Yeah, they're very consistent at coming out quickly and then just building on top of that.
Yeah. One of the things I noticed, and I feel like we got an explanation, but I'm not sure. It seemed like East Cobb's shooter was like starting to struggle a little bit towards the end there. Was I the only one that noticed that, or did you?
No. And that was one of the things that I was going to say is, I think, we said having our notes, they had a good shooter, but it wasn't a great shooter. I don't think that was able to adjust a lot to what we honestly would see in not only week 2 of them, but week 3 and so on and so forth, which is the different qualities of balls that you're going to deal with. So the fact that, a lot of their shots would go off and then, it'd be just sputter out of the shooter, or it would just go over. So they didn't really have a great control of that ball as it left the shooter. So the thought is, I don't think that they were ready in terms of adjusting to the different types of balls that they were going to be dealing with.
And that's where something we commented on the missing show is that the Dalton event actually played the entire event with the same exact set of balls or power cells that were played with at the Gainesville event. So they came in pre-worn. They only got more worn. Obviously, that set of power cells would have continued throughout the season. But yeah, it's something you got to factor in. The other thing strategically I think you got to factor in is that I think these teams the top teams we'll talk about at Dalton got to play with and against each other a few times throughout quals. But I think the trick is during those elimination series is that you have to figure out how to best play around the other offensive talent on your team. Either if you're doing the trench run to the human player the entire time, or if the other person's sweeping power cells off the floor the entire time, you just got to find your happy places there to be able to contribute at your highest level. Because at some point, just because the two of you averaged this amount and this amount during quals doesn't mean you can expect that contribution in elims because you've been getting power cells from the same place. Therefore, somebody's going to have to try a little bit harder to get power cells and aren't going to be playing at that full level. So working around other offensive teams or defensive teams for that matter is a big part of the success in eliminations.
I would definitely agree with you on that one.
Speaking of other offensive teams, we're going to move on and talk about 1771, North Gwinnett Robotics. So I'll start off by just highlighting some of the issues that we talked about last week in our last show with Chris, right? They actually had quite a hectic event. So when they first showed up, their robot was extremely overweight. They're not sure how. I'm not sure anybody ever really is sure how that happened.
Miscalibrated scales, I think, is the...
Yeah.
So they had weight issues, right from the off. Their climber broke off during one of the matches, but apparently that wasn't that big of a deal. And during finals and through most of eliminations, their bumpers were like literally falling off, right?
Yeah.
And so I think in one of the matches they literally fell. They got disconnected right in front of the feeding station, right?
Yep.
So huge props. Yeah, huge props to Walton. Yeah, Walton had to go around and carry the rest of that alliance. So what did you guys think about Walton? Or sorry, not Walton. North Gwinnett.
They had a very good shot. They could shoot from multiple different places, and they had that trench run autonomous. It was very compatible with what Walton brought, and I think that alliance was the perfect alliance to form at that event between those two machines.
Yeah, I think 1771's shot was I don't want to say it was the fastest because 1102 had the fastest shot, but 1102 didn't make very many of those fast shots. So I think 1771 had one of the best shots at the event because I think it was faster than 4910 and Walton. So
and that's where, in some way or another, I think between those four robots or four top shooting robots we're going to talk about, is at some point or another, each of them had the top shot. It was all just a matter of timing or when they were hitting it just right, but all competing for that spot at least.
Yeah.
Every one of those robots had a heat check type of match where it was all the shots were going in. So.
Yeah. And it was, I think from 1771, it was an uncharacteristically offensive event for them, right? Typically we do see them play their fair share of offense, but they sort of rely on their toughness and their physicality to get them through eliminations. Yeah. But this time it was a little bit more about pure offense, right? I saw very little defense, very little counter defense from them at Dalton. So
that's where I think they've gotten some time. I think talking to Christopher Wilson last week, he had mentioned that this is the third iteration of a turret the team's been using to some degree since 2009, I think. Mm-hmm. So they've been working off of a known design, which is a good way to use your resources. But it was encouraging and exciting to see 1771 get off to such a quick start to their season.
Yeah. All right. So moving on from 1771, we're going to talk about 1102 Make and Magic, right? So from a design perspective, they have the Spindexer, and they have that what for some reason is being called the Skywalker attachment that helps them
it's a pun.
Cool. And it helps them balance their robot. But I think I'm gonna hold my comments. What did you guys?
So can I? Do you want me to go on this one? Because
Yeah.
so here's the
Uh-oh.
reality. They were, like we said in the reveal night, they became their own worst enemy, right? You know, at the end of the day, in the terms of the alliance that they made with 4910, those two, on paper, could have been an amazing alliance together. 1102 had their spin dexter, which allowed them to be able to shoot amazingly well, or at least shoot off with some speed. They also had their spin dexter with the Skywalker, so they were able to balance along with 4910. But those, when we talk about on paper, that's the ideal condition, that is, with everything working. But at the end of the day, when one of the two teams chokes in one way or another, the other team has to be able to compensate for that. And when 4910 was dealing with their shots not landing and everything else, 1102 had to be the offensive powerhouse for the team in some way, fashion, or form. They couldn't hack it in the finals. And so they had to basically try to outgun a 2974 with a very efficient and very clean shot, as well as a 1771 that had a fast shot, and either 2 or 3 pointers from them, they were going to get their shot off. So when both teams are not operating at their ideal standard, and one of them chokes, and the other can't deliver, they're going to be their own worst enemy at the end of the day.
So that's where I thought 1102 had the most ambitious design, I think, that we've seen in terms of their robot, the spin dexter, the intaking system, turreted shooter with the hood, and the climber with the attachment to balance or regulate the balance. And I think what we saw at Dalton was them just, fielding this really, really complex machine and trying to get it up to speed, get all the kinks worked out. Because if you saw them, when they had their shot, they had their shot. But then they ran into those technicalities. They ran into that issue where their shooter hood wasn't popping up and down. That had kind of threw them off from what their normal shot was. So they just ran into some issues, they ran into some issues that have ultimately did not help them. But I think when it came down to alliance selection, any alliance of 1102 made the right decision, I thought, with 4910. They could have gone with 2974 or 1771, and I think the result wouldn't have stayed or would have been the same. I think two of those, 1102, unfortunately, was the fourth best of those top 4, just in terms of consistency and everything. So
very much so.
The other two that they didn't pick would 9 times or maybe 8 times out of 10 win the event.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I think is I'm not really sure when 1102's system started going haywire, right? But from what I saw, it's not like they didn't have any of the pieces, right? They had the spin dexter working, their Skywalker attachment was working. So, we've kind of railed on them a little bit, but to their extreme credit, I think they have the highest ceiling in the district, right?
Yes.
Even because I actually watched this one match where they were missing high, right? And on the one hand, it was funny because they were missing way above the goal. On the other hand, it was really impressive because those 5 balls were coming out in such a tight pattern, right? That if they had actually just been on target, it would have been a lethal barrage of power cells, right? And combine that with the fact that they have the Skywalker, they can climb really fast, they climb really high on the pole, they have a single point of attachment. It's a very clean climb, which we haven't seen from a lot of teams. I think they're one of the teams that's perhaps the best positioned right now.
Mm-hmm.
If that's kind of hard to see, because
if the season would have continued, I think these 1102 would have been one of the scariest contenders at then Carrollton and state champs.
Agreed.
I think they had all the puzzle pieces there. I think they have some things to work out for intaking / indexing. Often they'd have to wait for the power cell to settle in the spin dexter before moving on. Otherwise, it would kind of bobble out. But with that being said, I think they have a lot of the right pieces, and I'd be scared scared of playing against that robot. Should we see them at a future event?
Yeah, and I'm sure we will. It's just hopefully they have their issues worked out and they tighten the intake into their robot a little more.
Yeah.
All right, so our last team to discuss at Walton was a logo robot.
Dalton, not Walton.
Dalton, whatever, Matt. I'm like 5 days into spring break. I have no idea what day it is. It's just all right. 7451 Avenger Robotics, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we saw them at reveal night, and I think one of the things we called out then was that it looked like their intake and their indexing sort of pipeline was all one system.
Yeah.
And they definitely got that fixed for Dalton. And, they sort of showed off their really fast logo scorer, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what do you guys think of 7451, and how do you think they stack in this logo ranking of teams?
So, I think they're probably either number 2, or number 3 out there behind 1261, obviously, and then 4189 they might be waffling number 2 and 3 with them. But I was just very impressed with the speed at which they dumped, because as soon as they're lined up, it's split second, and they've got all 5. Unfortunately, that kind of hurt them at times because they fed too quickly for sometimes they would not align properly, and some would bounce out.
And that's where I think that in either 7451's or 1261's skill set, the primary contribution those teams gave was consistency, climbing, and then again how that consistency played in to scoring as many logos as they did. So with that being said, yeah, they're one of the best at their game in the state, because those teams obviously intentionally said this is the game we're playing, and they've done a remarkable job at it.
Yeah. One thing I would like to see from 7451 is just working on the intake a little more, right? Because I think with 1261's intake, or just generally with the Everybot, the intake is kind of idiot proof. You just sort of drive over the balls and it sucks them into that little hopper, right? With 7451, they have to funnel the balls into the narrow intake and they have to index it. And so it is a very meticulous process, it looks like, for them to pick up these power cells. And that's where I think the big divide is between 1261 and 7451, right? Like today, if I had to choose, probably 5 times out of 5, I'd go with 1261, right?
Yeah.
But if you're 7451 and you improve, have a really good dumper, I think to have a decent climber, I think that intaking ability is the one that's gotta come up somehow, right? Frankly, I don't really know how, because that's a pretty.
I think like 12, kind of what you were referencing with the width of is the curiosity is there a purpose to getting it down to a single ball width at any given point? Which again, you said, so 1261 intakes at full width, indexes at full width, and scores full width. Can you get around 7451's problem by just opening up the width of the robot to be the storage for power cells, instead of saying, all right, we're bringing many to one to score in a single line, instead saying we're going to intake full width, store full width, and score full width? So.
Well, with the way the robot's designed, right, and that's where they pick up at the bottom and then it comes to the top, right? If you go full width, I'm not sure how the intaking and indexing systems would integrate, right?
And I think they have an opening on the front middle of their bumper to let the power cells come up through the middle. So that would be something you'd have to get around. But
yeah, I almost wonder if maybe they started out with the idea of having a shooter, because that funnel, and it's so narrow. It's we don't have time. We'll just jump it out the back, right? But they could just as easily.
This
Yeah,
brings up one of my favorite robots at the Dalton event, which was 4516 and their double double shooter. It was kind of the same idea. Instead of bringing it to a single ball width and scoring one ball at a time, why not score two at a time?
how did 4516 do? Like, were they?
I'd say they were safely in the top 10 for shooting power cells at the event, a bit behind that top group of four. But yeah, it works pretty well considering they every now and then one would jam that they'd only get to shoot with the second one, but it's fun to watch.
That kind of reminds me of like that scene from 200, scene from 300 where the guy loses his eye. And it's like, oh, Lord has graced me with another.
Built-in redundancy.
Wow.
Yeah, one shooter goes down, you still got another.
See, the thing is, you pitch that as a feature, then it's an industrial design.
Bada bing, bada boom.
Okay, so before we close, because we're coming up on time, do you guys have any closing thoughts or remarks that you'd like to make? Anything at all?
I regret none of my comments.
Okay, Kyle regrets nothing.
You may find Kyle's comments written on an intake or some other mechanism of some other team he's wronged on the show, displayed on the show. But with that being, all right, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I'm excited to see where things go from here. There's some big question marks on what the off season looks like. We'll see what our next show looks like. We kind of get a big question mark there for ourselves. But yeah, looking forward to what's next.
Yep. I technically survived my first year as a head coach.
Yeah.
That was a shortened one. So it was fun. It was a lot of nights where I didn't get nearly enough sleep.
Welcome to FRC.
Yeah.
I would say the main thing that I'm looking forward to is just how the season restarts, right? I'm like really kind of interested in like the logistics of how we organize things and what that means for the teams and planning and things like that. So I'm interested to see how that folds out. One thing I would like to see is maybe if First or Georgia First could release like a few plans, right? Like, hey, right now, if things calm down by May, we're going to go early fall, right? Or if things are still kind of looking messy by, June, July, then we're looking at the late fall, right? Those kinds of things help, like calm teams help, like provide some transparency. So I'm not very hopeful, but it'd be nice to kind of see what the thought process is right now, just so the teams can start adjusting, start moving in that direction. So.
And to mention something, if you think you have an interesting idea on how you'd like the off season or things to proceed in general, if you know somebody on the planning committee or a higher up volunteer in Georgia First, send your ideas their way, because as fresh as this thing is, I think a lot of ideas are still on the table. And at this brainstorming phase, part of the process, I think it's good to get all the ideas on the table.
And I think, Sonny, something you said before in a previous conversation was, I think it'd be interesting, especially the fact that this is, in essence, going to be an off season. If we maybe try out some new things with these events, one of the things that you had mentioned is kind of seeing what we could do from the scouting experience, or more, I would say, your clarification was more in terms of the coaching and strategy experience, to make it more like what you would see in maybe a NFL game or NBA game, where a lot of it is more of a direct correspondence from your other coaching staff or other strategy staff to your players live on the field. I think that could be an interesting play to make with these events.
Just don't be the Astros and steal signs.
I don't know if you guys remember this from last. I think IRI implemented it last year. It's been around a little bit, but is it Zebra something or other? They do like heat mapping of your robot on the field. So they have the equipment set up around the field. Each team gets their own little tag, that they then provide every team with this information that you can then figure out where teams are playing most frequently. So you can kind of identify points at where they might have a bottleneck and where you can play defense on them, or where their sweet spots are for shooting, or that. I'd be curious about what necessary technology would need to be implemented for getting that at a Georgia PCH event.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I'm inclined to think that we won't see too much experimentation, simply because since First has suspended the season, I assume that these events will spin up as official First events. So we're going to see like blue banners, like that's my assumption. And if that's the case, I don't think we'll see too much experimentation around like the like zebra thing or like around scouting.
On the scouting note, there was some experimentation that happened even with the 2 weeks of competition. There's Brian from Ignite, fellow mentor, had kind of came up with this idea based on what 1678 does for scouting. Now, 1678 is a big enough team that they can throw 18 scouts at a single match, and having 3 people watch the same robot and check the numbers of those scouts. Did the power cell scored match up between those 3 scouts? But so they're doing data validation within their own team. That a lot of Georgia teams don't have that many students for scouting. But the idea turned into, how do we crowdsource this thing? So we then mashed at least a few teams together to say, all right, the 3 teams are scouting, each of us scout as we normally would with 6 scouts, collecting our numbers. That will then throw those numbers against each other, check them against each other, and then therefore have better scouting data as a result. Yeah. So we wound up with a handful of teams contributing to that. The Peach Alliance is what it wound up being referred to as. That there will be some more resources coming out about it. But I think with first run of it viewed as a successful launch, the idea would be to continue incorporating more and more teams into it, so that teams that participate are going to see that higher level of quality when it comes to their scouting information.
Mm-hmm. All right. So you know what? On that note, I think we're a little bit well over time. I'm just going to end things. Everybody, please stay safe, and practice your social distancing. Don't hang out and party too much. So stay safe, and we'll be back whenever the season gets back underway. All right.
Yeah.
Have a good night. Take care.
Keep your bumpers on.
Yeah.